Hi everyone. Here is the second part of the animal lecture. I tried to keep it somewhat limited just so there wasn't too much for you guys to watch this weekend, um, plus Monday prior to Wednesday's exam. Okay, so last time when we talked about animals, there was a lot of interest with the mating of octopus, and how specifically they die shortly after mating. So I did a little bit of research, not too much. So essentially, after mating, what happens is the mothers will continue to eat until they eventually lay their eggs. But once their eggs are laid, they stop eating, and their primary goal at this point is really to just protect their eggs. So they're kind of stationary after legs are laid, and they kind of just wait around for them to hatch, and either they make it right around until the eggs hatch, or they pass a little before then. Fathers typically live just a little bit longer than females do. And this is a really recent article, but researchers think that what's causing the death of the parents is there's an upregulated set of genes essentially involved with the production of sex hormones as well as with insulin like hormones. And with these upregulated hormones, they see an increase in cholesterol as well. And the combination of cholesterol and insulin like hormones probably just trigger or act like a death response for these parents. So their bodies slowly start to deteriorate after this. This is just a brief little background, though. So, answering questions from class. I'm sure there's more that you can find if you go to Google Scholar and maybe look up some of the people involved with this research article. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. We're going back to the tree. And last time we ended with protostomia. So these are the organisms that we talked about at the end of last class. And these organisms are characterized by the formation of the mouth before the anus during embryonic development. I'm going to go kind of quickly through this, but feel free to pause throughout the video. Um, Make note of sorts of organisms that are involved with each of these groups that I go through. And yeah, there will be a study guide that has more specific things for you guys to look at as well. Okay, so we're going to start with annelids. And these are segmented worms, like the one shown here. And this includes worms that are earthworms or leeches. And there are around like 9,000 species within this one group. So the type of body seen here, where it's these little segments, is called metamerism. So this is when you see repeated segments that are really similar in structure, that are repeated and make up the essentially entire body. So within this one group of annelids, there are three subgroups. We'll just call them marine worms, earthworms, and leeches, just to be simple. Um, and some of these marine worms are really like extraordinary compared to like leeches and earthworms all kind of look similar. But these marine worms, there are some that are stationary like this, and this is the spiral gilled tube worm, and its mouth is like attached to the ground here, and it has these gills going all the way around it, which is a really neat structure. And if you Google these, there's a lot of really cool colorations that go along with them. But there's also marine worms that can swim around, like this palalo worm. So yeah, there's a lot of really funky worms out there in this annelid group, and specifically cool variation within the marine worms. So these animals as a whole lack eyes, but do have small receptors on them that allow them to perceive light. So, light from dark environments. Um, but they do become paralyzed if they're exposed to light for too long. So a lot of you might like walk around campus and see, sadly, worms who are shriveled up and passed away on the concrete. Probably because they just got stuck there because they were exposed to too much light. And finally, all of these individuals will essentially die if the skin and slime are dried out. So one thing that people used to do with leeches is they used to pour salt on them to get them to release their bite. It gets them to release their bite, but I also read that it's not something you're supposed to do because it can get the leech to vomit as well, which may infect the bite. So take that with a grain of salt if you ever get a leech bite. Okay, so sister to annelids in this little group here are arthropods. And this is the last group that we'll be going over in Protostomia. So we're going to avoid this Rotifera nematode group. And these are cool. Some of these Rotifera are kind of like similar to Protists. They can be single-celled organisms that are super complex but really cool. And nematodes are typically parasitic, which might be something you're interested in. So feel free to take a look at that on your own. We're going to end it with arthropods. And the word arthropod means those that have jointed feet, which just come with the kind of structure of arthropods. And there's an estimate of 1.2 to roughly 10 million species of arthropods. So these are like a super diverse group compared to all other animal taxa that we've talked about so far. And they are the most group of animals. And there are 4 subgroups that make up this phylum. So we're going to go through each of these. Uniramia, or hexapods, are the first group, and this is the largest clade of arthropods, and includes subclasses like Insecta and Ectobathnia. So individuals or organisms that are found within these groups are butterflies, insects, ladybugs, bees, and silverfish. And these typically consist of a 3-part body, so thorax and 3 sets of legs, so 6 legs altogether. And this group has recently been classified as a subgroup of Crustacea, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So Chelicerata is the second group that we're going to talk about. And this one includes organisms like spiders, horseshoe crabs, and arachnids, as well as land spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mites. And this name comes from the ancient Greek word for claw, which, kind of get the gist for with all these claws over here. There are roughly 77,000 known species that are, breathing air. So just land animals. And there are roughly 500,000 species that are totally unknown. And these organisms have bodies that are segmented with jointed limbs and surrounded by chitin and proteins. The third group that we're going to cover are Crustacea, or crustaceans. So this is the largest group of decapods, which includes things like shrimp, lobster, but also include animals like barnacles. The bodies of these are typically made of a few parts, including a head, thorax, and abdomen. And these can be fused together, or like seen here with this lobster, or like you see with other animals, these might be totally separate and connected underneath the exoskeleton of these animals. And males within this group are typically smaller than what we see with females. And I don't know if any of you know about the blue lobsters, but these are like super rare compared to any other any typical red lobster. And it's like a crazy probability, like a 1 in a million chance that you see one of these in nature. The last group that we're going to go over are actually extinct, but these are the trilobites. And we see a lot of these within the fossil record, specifically from the Cambrian era. And we didn't talk about the eras, but yeah, these were a really common group, and they're similar to arachnids, um, compared to at least the other subphyla. And the earliest known fossils from this one group date back all the way to about like 520 million years ago. So, this whole group, arthropods as a whole, is evolved a long, long time ago, specifically compared to the other groups that we're going to talk about after this. And those are within this one group called Deuterostomia. And unlike Proteostomia, this is just the opposite, where we see the formation of the anus before the mouth during embryonic development. The two groups from this that we're going to focus on are just Echinodermata and Chordata. So echinoderms are the first group. These are radial symmetric and feature animals like starfish, sand dollars, sea urchins, and many, many other marine species. There's roughly 7,000 species in total. The Greek word for echinodermata means echino means spiny, and the Latin word for derm means skin. So just spiny skinned, which is a characteristic that we see a lot with these animals. So with this group, they don't have blood or a heart, so they use a water vascular system to move oxygen throughout their bodies. And in this photo over here, you can see their tubed feet. So starfish, for instance, will use these tube feet to move around, but also to intake water that has oxygen within it. So they use these to take in oxygen and also to circulate the oxygen throughout their bodies while pushing out deoxygenated water. These animals are carnivorous, which you might not expect, and they typically feed on sponges and mollusks. However, this lucky guy over here caught a fish. So, with these animals, we see a really kind of interesting way of feeding. They hold on to their prey using their tubed feet, but they then excrete their stomachs, which are right in the center here. You can't really see it well from this photo, but they excrete their stomachs from their body, and these release digestive enzymes, which help them break down whatever it is they caught, and then they absorb those nutrients back into the stomach, while then putting the stomach back in their bodies. Okay, so the last group is technically Chordata, but this contains 4 different groups, including fish, birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. So we're going to cover each of these kind of briefly, and we're going to start with fish. So there's around 34,000 species of fish, including fresh and saltwater groups. And these are the most diverse group of vertebrates. And there's 3 main groups within fish. The bony fish. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, I messed that up. Okay. There's a cartilaginous fish as well as a jawless fish. So if I jump forward too. We'll start with the bony fish. This is the most diverse as well as common group of fish. And these individuals feature a true bone skeleton. And these are probably what you think of when you think of a fish. So they have more of a classic vertebrate feature, where they have a body that consists entirely of bones. The next is the cartilaginous fish. And these are fish who have like a modified structure where instead of possessing bones, their body is made up of, or their body structure is made up entirely of cartilage. And oddly enough, we see some really interesting organisms within this group, including things like sharks, skates, rays, and chimeras, which is this bottom guy over here. Um, so this is a highly unique group of organisms, specifically a subgroup of fish, um, that all kind of feature their own unique architectures compared to what you would typically think of from a more common group like the bony fish. And the last group of fish are the jawless fish. And these species don't possess a jaw, shocker, um, but also have a nostril overlaying their mouth. And they typically find their food using scent from that nostril. And these groups include lamprey, which are down here, and the hagfish, which is up here. And other species within the subgroup have gone extinct. And what we typically see from these species are soft skin, no scales, and they're typically found in more northern regions like the northern Atlantic or within the Great Lakes. Okay, so next we're going to talk about amphibians and reptiles. And we're specifically going to talk about the difference between these. So you make sure you know the difference between these for the exam. Amphibians have moist, smooth skin, and they generally have a mucus coating to their skin. And these species are born with gills, and many of them will develop lungs at different life stages, but not all do. But general rule is most of them do. Reptiles, on the other hand, have scales, and their skin is typically dry. And these species are born and have lungs their entire life cycle. So we're going to talk about amphibians briefly first. This group includes animals like frogs, toads, salamanders, newts, and caecilians, which is this bottom guy over here. And these individuals absorb water through their skin, except toad, obviously. But all these other guys do. And they all have that kind of mucousy layer and smooth skin, which is adapted to allow them to absorb water. So there's no need for these species to be drinking. Reptiles, on the other hand, include species like turtles, lizards, snakes, geckos, crocodiles, and alligators. And some of these have really cool adaptations, like this gecko image down here. These guys have really tiny hairs, like microscopic hairs. You can see the scale here, 1 micrometer. And these hairs allow them, and well, first they're located on the bottom of their feet, and they allow them to stick to really obscured surfaces that they wouldn't otherwise be able to climb. Not all reptiles have these, but there are some really cool adaptations like this. And reptiles are the most closely related group of animals, like modern day animals, to dinosaurs. And they both belong within this group, Reptilia, along with one other group of modern day animals, which you might be able to guess, is birds. So birds are highly related to reptiles. They fall within the same clade. And therefore, they're super related to dinosaurs. And here is what we think a more modern dinosaur looks like. Oh, sorry. That modern day birds may have actually descended from. And the idea with dinosaurs and birds being related is that dinosaurs, some of them did have feathers, and as they shrunk over time and became smaller and smaller, the evolution of flight probably occurred within birds because of this shrinking in size. And birds are they're a really old group and a really diverse group. And these species feature typically flashy males who possess really cool colors as well as really elaborate songs just to impress females. Um, but there's some really cool literature out there on bird songs. A lot of these songs can also be used as like a territorial thing, like "Stay away from my trees," um, and some species possess like dozens and dozens of songs, which all are pretty elaborate. So, the largest bird is the common ostrich, which can be up to 9 feet tall, or and 350 pounds. And the smallest bird is the bee hummingbird, which you can see here. It's these aren't big flowers. It's a really small bird. It's about 2.25 inches tall, and it weighs almost nothing. But yeah, these animals are really diverse, and you see all sorts of sizes, colors, songs come from these guys. There's also many birds. There's almost 60 species today that are flightless. And this includes penguins, ostriches, and rays. Um, there's many groups of penguins, so they probably make up most of the 60. Um, but yeah, there's also kiwis, which you're seeing here in this top image, which these are also flightless, but they've almost entirely lost their wings altogether. They are really short and aren't really used for anything. They're just kind of, if you look at them, they're one big ball. Um, yeah, so another really cool like adaptation. They've lost their wings because they're no longer really needed for these species. They're kind of little ground dwellers. There's roughly 10,000 species of birds. So again, super diverse group. And down here is an image of the Arctic tern. And we're not talking about migration too much in this class. It might come up later on in the semester, but only for a little bit. But these guys actually migrate from the North to South Pole every single year. So these guys are really incredible and fly like around 56,000 miles in a given year. Okay, last group. We're going to talk about mammals. Um, and mammals kind of separate themselves from all of these other groups due to these like 5 characteristics, which all mammals do share. Um, and not saying all of these are just found within mammals, but all of them have this kind of these 5 features. At some stage or another, they all feature hair or fur. The second, they're all warm blooded. These animals all grow in a uterus and are born alive. Um, 4, their young feed on milk, which are produced by mammary glands. And these animals, generally speaking, have much larger and more complex brains than any other group of animals. And here's a kind of cool phylogeny, um, just showing some of the variation that we see. There's only around, a little over 5,000 species of mammals, including things like us, dolphins, really anything else that has hair. Um, so it's a diverse group, but there's not as many species as, many other organisms have. Or, sorry, not organisms, any other groups of animals have. And you might be thinking, because one of the rules for mammals is that they have hair, right? And you might think of things like dolphins, for instance. At least that's what came to my mind. There's also things like whales that are mammals. And you might be thinking to yourselves, like, dolphins don't have hair, right? Like, look at them. They're perfectly smooth. There's no way they have, like, some microscopic hair on them. And that's true. Like, they don't, generally speaking. But they do have when they're born, these really little whiskers here um, that appear kind of on the end of their mouths. And these don't last their entire lives. So this is a young dolphin in the image. But yeah, over a short course of their lifespan, they feature these little hairs, and those are lost as they grow in age. So we typically don't think of dolphins as having hair, but they are born with this. So they still fit the five rules of the mammal group. Just a few fun facts because we could talk about all of these mammal groups one by one. Um, but we're jamming this into a little video that's coming right before the test. So we're just sticking with this. Um, Blue whales are the largest mammal, and they can grow up to the largest recorded one is 33 meters long, and weighs 190 tons, which is like a tremendous amount of weight. You can do the math on that. Um, Chimpanzees may go bald as they age, so similar to um, some humans, they can just lose the hair on tops of their heads. Um, which, yeah, another trait you probably didn't know that humans shared with chimpanzees. And the only mammals who are able to fly are bats. And maybe you didn't know bats were mammals, but now you do. And yeah, Moose tries his best to fly, but he doesn't get too far. Um, okay, that's it for my animal lecture. I will be uploading this as well as a study guide today, um, or at least at some point tonight. So stay tuned for those as well as an announcement. And yeah,